Windsor Beauties. Thank you to Balesa for sponsoring this video. Stay tuned to find out how you can get a free toy or gift card in their massive giveaway. We're here at Hampton Court Palace in the Communications Gallery to look at a very special collection of paintings, the Windsor Beauties. These portraits immortalize 10 women said to be the most stunning members of the Restoration Court. They exude elegance, confidence, and more than a hint of seduction. It was long whispered that famous philanderer King Charles II used the paintings like a catalog to select which lovely lady would be his bedfellow for the evening. His lascivious majesty would then place his order with the keeper of the Privy Closet, known as his Pimp-master General, who would then call for the patiently waiting lucky lady. The Windsor Beauties gained such a notorious reputation that by 1835, the now prudish royal court despised them. The collection was exiled from Windsor and consigned to Hampton Court Palace, which was no longer a royal residence. But were the Windsor Beauties really just Restoration pinups, or is there more to the story? Let's meet the real women rendered in colorful goop and find out why they were chosen. We'll discover who was and was not a royal mistress, and which beauties were sleeping with each other's husbands. We'll learn how they traded their looks for power and wealth, and find out if they were really as attractive as their famous portraits. Let's get to know the Windsor Beauties. First, let's set the scene. King Charles I lost the Civil War and his head in 1649, and his family fled to France. Oliver Cromwell and the Puritans cracked down on England's morality. They closed theaters, pubs, and brothels, demanded everyone attend church, stay sober, and wear modest, monotone clothes. After a decade of drudgery, the English invited the old king's flamboyant son to restore the monarchy as King Charles II. He brought the color back to England and put his heart and many other body parts into being the complete opposite of the Puritans. The merry monarch's court was full of art, music, parties, romance, and sex. The swarthy sovereign had 14 known mistresses and 13 recognized illegitimate children. I have 2 episodes all about them. The women were certainly up for it. Noble ladies and common actresses who went to bed with the king were rewarded with wealth and power, and saw their children elevated to the peerage. During the Restoration, women finally had the opportunity not only to take the stage, but to write plays, books, and music. But the patriarchy was still well baked in, so beauty remained the primary weapon women could wield. By winning the right friends, husbands, and in some cases lovers, the ladies of the court were able to hold more power than ever before. In the midst of this scene, Hyde, who used her own charms to go from commoner to the wife of the king's brother, James, Duke of York, decided to decorate her royal apartments at St. James's Palace with elegant artwork, celebrating femininity and accomplishment. She hired preeminent court painter Sir Peter Lely to create a set of 10 portraits, like 17th century posters of Rosie the Riveter or snapshots from a girl's weekend. Anne didn't pick the sitters based on who the king liked. She asked her own closest friends to model. The Restoration was a special time in English history when women's sexuality was celebrated rather than shamed. And I am so happy to live in an era where everyone can explore and embrace their own pleasure. That's why I'm so excited to partner with Balesa, a bi-woman company for all things sexual wellness. They have a ton of toe-curling toys you've got to try. Pebble has suction and vibration, controlled independently. Air Vibe has dual internal and external stimulation, and it's silent but deadly. And Thump does it all. Vibration, suction, and well, it thumps. Balesa's toys are pretty as a painting. waterproof, USB rechargeable, and they're made from soft, premium quality body-safe silicone. They come in discreet charging cases, so you don't have to worry about embarrassing luggage mishaps on your next sea voyage or encounter with airport security. They have phenomenal options if you're looking for a little solo restoration or if you want to add some imported Silk Road spice to your next hot date with King Charles II or Hortense Mancini. They even have a quiz to help you find your perfect toy. Right now, everyone who signs up to my giveaway with Bellesa wins something. So click the link in the description for your free toy or gift card for a toy today. And now, back to history. Elizabeth Hamilton, Comtesse du Gremont, was born at her father's castle in County Tipperary, Ireland. When she was 10, Cromwell invaded her homeland and her family fled to France. Elizabeth attended a prestigious convent school, then became a maid of honor to the Dowager Queen in exile, Henrietta Maria. Elizabeth accompanied the royals back to London as they restored the monarchy. She was called La Belle Hamilton and was renowned not only for her beauty, but also for her judgment, charm, and sensibility. She was a crack wit and loved practical jokes. Margaret Lady Needham, another Windsor beauty, was the butt of one of her farces. Elizabeth convinced Margaret that the Queen was holding a costume ball. Margaret went all out with an elaborate Babylonian disguise. She was quite shocked when she arrived to find everyone in their contemporary finery, staring at her bizarre outfit. Elizabeth was widely courted. The Duke of Richmond pursued her, but when she learned that he was a gold digger, she rejected him. She managed to resist the supposedly irresistible Baron of Dover, and she was not tempted by the massive fortunes of the heir of Norfolk or the Earl of Falmouth. One man who does not seem to have made romantic overtures towards her was King Charles. There is no record of them having been lovers. His brother James did make a move, but she turned him down as he had just married her friend Anne Hyde. This doubtless contributed to her inclusion in the beauties. One wouldn't want to look at the face of one's husband's mistress in their dressing room every day. The man who finally won her coquettish heart was Philibert Chevalier du Gremont. He had courted the lady King Louis XIV was after, and he had been kicked out of France. He was in his 40s, but Elizabeth fell in love with his wit and gallantry. He was more interested in another beauty, Jane Middleton, but she turned him down. Elizabeth may have resorted to desperate measures to win her crush's attention. According to one story, Philibert and Elizabeth had a blazing affair which left her pregnant and unwed. He received a letter from King Louis and abandoned Elizabeth in his haste back to France. Her brothers pursued him to Dover, and at sword point asked him if he had forgotten something back in London, to which he wisely replied, "Forgive me, sirs, I have forgotten to marry your sister." But this story is likely just gossip, as Philibert was actually only allowed back in France because he had gotten married. The newlyweds moved to the Louvre Palace, and Elizabeth was appointed lady-in-waiting to Queen Maria Theresa of Spain. She gave birth to a son and 2 daughters, who were both later appointed maids of honor to Maria Anna of Bavaria, wife of Le Grand Dauphin. Philibert inherited the title Comte du Gremont, and Elizabeth became a comtesse. She was implicated in the notorious affair of the poisons, which brought down many ladies at the French court. But she managed to avoid serious consequences. She lost her position when Queen Maria Theresa died, but when the court moved to the new palace of Versailles, she was granted luxurious apartments and a house on the edge of the grounds, a sure sign of royal favor. Elizabeth died at 67. Mary Bagot, Countess of Falmouth and Dorset, was the daughter of a colonel and grew up in the family's modest country house, Pipe Hall. Her remarkable beauty caught the eye of Charles Berkeley, Earl of Falmouth, a massive step up for a minor country lady. Falmouth brought his gorgeous bride to the Palace of Whitehall to show her off. He soon regretted it, as Mary was promptly invited into the bed of King Charles. Mistresses' husbands who looked the other way were handsomely rewarded, but Falmouth didn't get to enjoy his consolation prize as he was killed by a cannonball during the Second Anglo-Dutch War. Mary remained at court by the king's favor. 9 years later, her friend Anne Hyde died of breast cancer at 34. Her widower, James, considered marrying Mary. Had he done so, she would have become queen 12 years later when he inherited the throne. But Mary was in love with Charles Sackville, Earl of Dorset and Middlesex, and the couple eloped. They lived happily for 5 years, but Mary died at 34 while giving birth to her first child. Elizabeth Wriothesley, Countess of Northumberland, was the daughter of the Earl of Southampton. At 16, she was married to Jocelyn Percy, Earl of Northumberland. He was only 18, and the pair had a good relationship. Their son, Henry, died in infancy, but their daughter Elizabeth survived. 8 years in, the couple traveled to Italy, where Jocelyn fell ill and died at 26. Because he didn't have a male heir, his earldom reverted to the crown. The king also helped himself to the late earl's massive estate, which he granted to his own illegitimate son, James, Duke of Monmouth. Elizabeth sued the king for return of the land her husband had willed to their daughter. She won the case, and little Elizabeth became one of the wealthiest heiresses in England. Elizabeth and Charles were rivals in the courtroom, and certainly not lovers in the bedroom. She later remarried to Ralph Montague, and they had a son and daughter, though he was frequently unfaithful. Elizabeth died at 44. Anne Digby, Countess of Sunderland, was the daughter of the Earl of Bristol. She had a long-standing engagement to Robert Spencer, Earl of Sunderland. The couple were passionately in love, but prone to dramatics. Right before the wedding, the groom-to-be told his friends that he had reason enough and was resolved never to have her. The couple's mothers stepped in to broker peace, and they walked down the aisle and into a long and happy marriage. Anne gave birth to 5 children. In 1673, the widowed Duke of York remarried to Italian Princess Mary of Modena. She was only 15 and the Duke was 40. Over the course of their marriage, Mary suffered 10 miscarriages and stillbirths. In 1685, King Charles II died childless, and his brother became King James II. Anne Digby was appointed a lady-in-waiting to the new queen, Mary. In this capacity, she was present during one of the most controversial events in British history. In 1688, Queen Mary gave birth to a healthy son, James Francis Edward. But King James was widely unpopular, and worse, he was Catholic. His Protestant people put up with him because when he died, the throne would go to his eldest Protestant child, Mary, the daughter of Anne Hyde. But as a male heir, baby James would outrank his older sister and become first in line to the throne, and he would be raised Catholic. Protestants desperately desired to discredit the boy. Rumors ran wild that the baby was an impostor and had been smuggled into the birthing chamber in a warming pan. And the king had made the mistake of only inviting his Catholic friends, including Anne Digby, to witness the birth. A group of MPs invited Princess Mary and her husband, William of Orange, to invade England and take the throne. The bloodless coup became known as the Glorious Revolution. King James, Queen Mary, and their son fled for France. Though James attempted to retake the throne, it remained occupied by Mary II and William III, England's only joint monarchs. The couple were childless, and when they died, the crown passed to Mary's younger sister, Anne. She had a long friendship and probably romantic relationship with Sarah Churchill. Anne Digby was also a close friend of Sarah's. The pair were political allies and supporters of the Whig Party, while the Queen was a Tory. Queen Anne was frequently jealous of the friendship between her favorite and the Countess. Anne Digby lived to the age of 69. Jane Needham, Mrs. Middleton, was born into Welsh gentry. At 14, she was married off to Charles Middleton, an unimpressive gentleman 10 years her senior. The couple lived in London on the charity of their relatives. It was Jane's incomparable beauty which allowed her to enter the royal court. She became a courtesan and was financially supported by a number of powerful men, including poet Edmund Waller, writer Charles de Saint-Evremond, Viscount Ranelagh, and Ralph Montague, whom you will recall was married to another beauty, Elizabeth Wriothesley, and Lawrence Hyde, Earl of Rochester, who was married to beauty Henrietta Boyle. Jane didn't only ruffle Elizabeth and Henrietta's feathers. She was also pursued by Philibert de Guermantes, whom fellow beauty Elizabeth Hamilton had set her own cap to. Elizabeth's brother wrote bitingly of Jane, handsomely made, all white and gold. She had in her manners and in her way of speaking something that was extremely pretentious and affected, and not to everyone's taste. She was most tiresome when she wished to be most brilliant. Jane doesn't seem to have bored the king, however. He put the charm on her in 1665. Jane was happy to flirt with His Majesty, but she drew the line at sex. A courtesan was not always synonymous with a sex worker. Courtesans traded in much more than sexual favors. They played important roles in the social life of the court as companions, connection makers, and muses. Jane appeared in several paintings by Lely and other artists. She was also a painter in her own right, though none of her work has survived. Jane is believed to have only had 2 lovers outside of her marriage, Ralph Montague and Lawrence Hyde. The fact that she turned down the king is strong evidence that she followed her own heart rather than her purse when it came to matters of sex. After Charles left Jane unsatisfied, his younger brother James took a shot, but he too was rejected. As Jane aged, tributes from her admirers dried up. She tried to get her 17-year-old daughter, Jenny, into the king's bed, but Charles, by then 48, wasn't interested. When James II came to the throne, he bestowed upon Jane a pension of £500. But by the reign of William and Mary, she was insolvent. She died at 46. One might wonder if Jane Middleton was any relation to another commoner who won the heart of a royal with her beauty and charm. However, Middleton is not an uncommon name, and I have found no familial connection between Jane and Catherine, Princess of Wales. The next 2 beauties were a pair of sisters, Margaret Brooke, Lady Denham, and Frances Brooke, Lady Whitmore. They were the children of a member of Parliament. At 23, Margaret was married off to one of her father's political allies, John Denham, who was 30 years her senior. Margaret enjoyed life at court, but not going to bed with her husband. She had an affair with James, Duke of York. She infuriated his wife, Anne Hyde, who likely regretted including her in the Windsor Beauties. Margaret and James openly flaunted their love affair, and their spouses turned incandescent with rage. At 25, Margaret became seriously ill and died. It was whispered that she had been poisoned, either by her husband or her former friend, Anne Hyde. James was pretty bummed by the whole situation. He declared that he would never again publicly acknowledge a mistress. And though he had many lovers over the years, he was discreet. Frances lived a quieter life than her sister. She wed twice, first to Sir Thomas Whitmore, and after his death to Matthew Harvey. Frances managed to avoid major scandal and lived into her 50s. Henrietta Boyle, Countess of Rochester, was the daughter of the Earl of Cork. Over 2 generations, the ambitious Boyle family had become all-powerful in Southern Ireland. Henrietta inherited their strong-minded assertiveness. At 19, she married Lawrence Hyde, Earl of Rochester, the brother of Anne Hyde. She was not timid about claiming her rights and asking for more. Following her sister-in-law's death, Henrietta was appointed governess of her children, Mary and Anne. The teenage future queens did not get along with their aunt. Anne, who was also formidable, argued with Henrietta over who should have the best royal apartments at Whitehall Palace. She complained bitterly of her aunt's peevishness. Henrietta might have fallen out of grace upon her niece's accession, but she did not live to see it. She died at 41. Barbara Villiers, Duchess of Cleveland, was the daughter of a viscount who spent his fortune outfitting a regiment in support of Charles I. Had the king won the Civil War, he would have been richly rewarded. Instead, he was killed in battle and left his family impoverished. Barbara grew into a great beauty, but without a dowry, her marriage prospects were dim. She wed Irish Baron Roger Palmer. In 1659, a group of supplicants, including Roger and Barbara, set sail for France to ingratiate themselves to the soon-to-be sovereign. Barbara became Charles's lover and soon surpassed all others, becoming his maîtresse en titre, or chief mistress. When Charles returned in triumph to England, Barbara was by his side. He rewarded her with 2 pennies on every pound of silver minted into coin, making her a very rich woman. He rewarded her husband with the earldom of Castlemaine, but he was a miserable cuckold, and he and Barbara separated. When Charles's new bride, Portuguese Princess Catherine of Braganza, arrives in England, the king named Barbara Lady of her Bedchamber. Catherine fainted when she heard the news, and though she had little choice but to smile and put up with her husband's dalliances, she and Barbara feuded constantly in private. Barbara gave birth to 5 of Charles's children, all of whom were granted titles or married into the peerage. She was called the Uncrowned Queen and was notorious for her involvement in politics, extravagance, and temper. She helped herself to money from the privy purse and took bribes from the Spanish and French. But after 5 years at the center of court, Barbara's influence over the king began to wane. In an attempt to win him back, she converted to Catholicism, a faith Charles had long been enamored of. The king remarked that he was interested in ladies' bodies, not their souls. Barbara gave birth to a 6th child, but Charles did not believe that he was the father and refused to acknowledge her. Barbara's position as a lady of the bedchamber was revoked and she was sent away from court. Charles did grant her Nonsuch Palace and created her Duchess of Cleveland as parting gifts, but she continued to spend as though she still had royal patronage. She was soon forced to tear down Nonsuch Palace and sell it for bricks. She reconciled with the king, and he spent an evening enjoying her company a week before his death. The 45-year-old Duchess had an affair with an actor and gave birth to a 7th child. At 65, she married a handsome young army officer, but he turned out to be a fortune hunter who became violent when she cut off his allowance. She discovered that he had married an heiress 2 weeks before he wed her, and she had him prosecuted for bigamy. Barbara died of dropsy at 68. Frances Stuart, Duchess of Richmond and Lennox, was the daughter of a court physician. She was a lady-in-waiting to both Queens Henrietta Maria and Catherine of Braganza. Frances was famed for her beauty and childish silliness. Charles admired her greatly, but, like Anne Boleyn, she refused to sleep with him unless he married her. Like Henry VIII, he considered divorcing his childless queen to marry Frances, but the plan never came through. She instead wed his cousin, Charles Stuart, Duke of Richmond and Lennox. They had no children, likely because the king frequently sent his cousin on diplomatic missions so he could continue attempting to seduce his wife. Frances's beauty was immortalized not only as one of the Windsor Beauties, but also as the image of Britannia on the farthing. At 22, she was infected with smallpox. She survived, but her beautiful face was disfigured. The king stopped trying to get her into bed, but they remained close friends. Frances was prominent at court until her death at 55. One other lady, Anne Hyde, Duchess of York and Albany, was not part of the original set of Windsor Beauties. But as she was their commissioner, she is an important part of their story. She was also painted by Peter Lely in a style that fits right in with the beauties, though this portrait is currently kept far away in Scotland at the Palace of Holyrood House. Anne was the daughter of Edward Hyde, an advisor to Princes Charles and James, who followed them to France. When 23-year-old James laid eyes on Edward's 19-year-old daughter Anne, he was smitten, and in the process of seducing her, he promised to marry her. When the monarchy was restored, Anne was pregnant, but no one expected the now reinstated prince to honor his promise to a commoner. Anne's own father locked her up in her room and advised King Charles to have her executed. But the king thought her strong personality was a positive influence on his weak-willed brother. The pair were married, and 2 months later she gave birth to their son. Sadly, he and 5 of his brothers and sisters died in infancy. The couple's only surviving children were Mary and Anne. Despite James's many mistresses, the couple had a happy marriage and were noted for their public displays of affection. High-born courtiers looked down their noses at Anne. It is notable that she selected for her friends, and thus the Windsor Beauties, not the women who enjoyed the highest peerage rank, but those who possessed beauty, charisma, kindness, and talent. 3 of the beauties had no titles at all, and they may have bonded with Anne over shared rejection from highly rank-conscious courtiers. Anne converted to Catholicism, and she convinced her husband of her faith. However, the king insisted that they keep their conversion a secret and raise their daughters Anglican. Anne fell ill with breast cancer and never recovered from the delivery of her 8th child. She died in 1671 at the age of 34 and was buried in Westminster Abbey. Both of her daughters, Mary and Anne, would go on to be queens. All 10 of the Windsor Beauties were friendly with Anne Hyde between 1662 and 65. Later on, there were betrayals, with beauties falling out with Anne and each other. Still, their portraits capture a moment in time and preserve in aspic 10 remarkable women in the bloom of youth. The beauties were all born in the 1640s, so they were in their late teens to mid-20s when they posed. But how close were the paintings to real life? Samuel Pepys described the set as good but not like, meaning they did not accurately resemble the women he actually knew at court. Like 17th century Photoshop, Lely and most other court artists use their paintbrushes to flatter their patrons, highlighting their best features and downplaying any unattractive attributes. Some of the beauties were noted by contemporaries for their good looks and may have required less flattery than others. The beauties also look eerily similar, with matching heavy-lidded eyes, pale skin, well-defined brows, full lips, and flowing ringleted hair. Over the years, the portraits have frequently gotten mixed up and mislabeled. But before you chalk it up to inbreeding, we must consider the artist's technique and the beauty standards of the time. Lely had his subjects come to his studio for a handful of sessions, during which he sketched their faces. Then, like 1660s glamour shots, they would select from a catalog of poses, clothing, backgrounds, and embellishments. His apprentices would paint everything on the canvas, and then the master would add in the face. Everything about the paintings was curated to fit the beauty ideals of the time. Some ladies were dressed in the height of 1660s fashion, while others were in the robes of Roman goddesses. Their chic state of undress, with loose gowns, no stays, and shifts on display, was less about an invitation to bed and more about showing off yards of expensive satin and silk, and portraying the casualness by which only ladies of great importance were permitted to dress. In 1688, after Anne's death, the Windsor Beauties were moved from her private apartments to Windsor Castle. King Charles was also dead by this time, so the story of him perusing them to select his bedfellow falls flat. The collection's 150 years at Windsor earns it its moniker. Copies were commissioned by Anne Digby's husband for display at Althorp Palace, and engravings were highly circulated, making the 10 beauties well known by the public. Over time, they became poster girls for the notoriously hedonistic Stuart court. One 19th century critic described them as a set of kept mistresses, painted tawdry, showing off their theatrical airs and graces, without one trace of real elegance or refinement, or one spark of sentiment to touch the heart. But despite what the uptight Victorians whispered, all of Whitehall was not Charles II's harem. Lascivious as the king was, he did have to employ some charm to seduce women, and they had the option to say no, a right many exercised. Of the 10 Windsor Beauties, only 2 were known to have gone to bed with King Charles. Casting these ladies as harlots and Restoration pinups does them a great disservice. It discounts the realities of their era, their individual characters, and the fascinating lives they led. If you enjoyed this video, please like, subscribe, comment your thoughts, and check out my other royal history videos. If you really want to help, please consider supporting me on Patreon. A link is in the description. Thank you for watching.